What's up everyone, Kaze no What If is here with What If a Soul was transferred into Coby's body. Before we start, if you like the video, like it, share with your friends, comment, and let's start the video. Trough the CP9. Frankie was still somewhat processing what he had witnessed, despite his hands reverently working on the project that he had guarded in his heart since before Tom's death, along with the long-nosed sniper taking over the less complex calculations. The raccoon dog completing the more difficult ones in less time it took to blink, leaving behind only the task of turning creation of the dream ship into a series of tasks that could be accomplished one after the other. Usopp, the steel-jawed, long-nosed sniper that kept sneaking tearful glances at the Going Merry, which rested, beached, not far from the clandestine shipyard where Frankie was slowly turning the massive quantities of atom wood into pieces to be assembled. He created only the unique pieces, leaving the preparation of perfect copies of the smaller components to the decidedly weird sniper. He threw every single, simplest piece in his own mouth, rolling it about, only to take the material it was made of and replicate it perfectly. It felt like cheating, but it sped up the work considerably, and given the sheer magnitude of it, the cyborg couldn't exactly refuse him, not when the pieces were exactly as needed, down to the meanest detail. Projections and calculations were executed perfectly by the quiet raccoon dog, while Frankie spent what little time was left into learning all he could from the book on dials that Usopp had given him. Nothing in there could truly compare to his super cola-based engine, or to the kind of weapon he could realize with it, but the applications could be put together in countless, clever manners, and the plans quickly lined up by Usopp were far from impractical, or unrealizable. They simply needed some time that the rest of the crew would apparently be spending infiltrating Ein's lobby. They've got a super pair of balls on them, that's for sure. He blinked quickly to avoid tearing up. Theirs was a story worthy of being sung. A small, harmless caravel from the east blew, toughing it up on the Grand Line because she loved the crew that sailed on her, to the point of creating an actual ship ferry. It was enough to move even the unfeeling heart of Ice for Brains, if he ever heard of it. "You're crying again, Frankie." Usopp's remark was ignored for a second. Then the cyborg sniffed loudly and shook his head, his focus remaining on the ship that was coming into being. "Shut up. I'm not crying, you're crying." As he worked, his mind went back to the last words Coby, their scary, potentially insane first mate, had told him. This ship will bring the king to the One Piece, make her fierce. He wanted fierce. He'd cry in wonder once he saw the finished product. "So it's true," the dull monotonous voice of Rob Lucci cut the quiet silence that the trio composed by a steel-jawed sniper, the human reindeer, and the cyborg shipwright. "Tom's apprentice is building a ship with atom wood." He was a tall and slim, yet muscular man with arched eyebrows and a close-shaved goatee. With shoulder-length, wavy black hair tied in a ponytail, he gazed flatly at the small, clandestine shipyard that had been raised quickly, tailored for the project that Frankie was bringing into reality. Then he sighed, "Well, it cannot be helped." The cool-looking member of Galila violently jerked back, avoiding a punch that would have caved his head in, and sidestepped a kick that left deep cracks on the ground it was on. Once he landed, further away from his targets, his attention shifted to the straw hat-wearing man who was cracking his knuckles, a heavy expression on his face as he spoke. "You're the strongest spoon, right?" "Spook, Captain." Zoro's voice rang hollowly while he rose from his sleeping position, not far from where the confrontation was about to take place. "Not spoon. I'm going to scrap the plate with him, so it doesn't matter." "Wipe the floor." The swordsman then tilted his head, as if suddenly considering something before talking again. "By any chance, did those expressions come from Coby?" Luffy nodded seriously, only to widen the distance between his feet and push a fist against the ground. His rubbery skin rippled, and it gained a shiny gleam, only for his form to begin to steam while he reddened considerably. Then he vanished, and a split second later, he had reappeared in front of the enemy, which instead was already skyrocketing towards the city of Water 7, the blow snapping his breath and coughing him off guard. Luffy followed in hot pursuit, and the fight was on. Ain's lobby stood in all of its magnificence while a group of 4 marines broke off from their much bigger formation, slinking off among the buildings without breaking their stride. Boarding the puffing Tom without being noticed had been child's play. Between Makita's power, Robin's experience, Sanji's inhuman strength, and my insane determination, it took us less than a handful of seconds to jump the rearguard and walk into the last carriage. Truly, the puffing Tom was a wonder. I felt almost jittery as I followed a silent Robin into a marine-filled carriage, only to witness all their necks snap in a single second by the use of her power. Let's dress up then. I immediately started taking off my shirt and trousers, taking care to switch Mr. Five's fruit into a pocket I could close with a button. I could only feel my heart hammering into my chest, and the temptation of just taking a bite had never been greater. We were trying for a furtive approach, but the chance of being found out was there, and what would I do in case I was forced to face a CP9 member? I will push through him. Let's hope my training will pay up. The thought was less comforting than what I hoped for, but part of me could only feel eagerness at the idea. I wanted to test myself, I wanted to see what I could actually do in 1 versus 1 fight. Sanji flat out went unconscious at the idea of changing clothes in the same room of Makita and Robin, but I ignored him with a scoff. We need to reach the Tower of Justice. Robin was deadly silent as she led us in a pattern that, thanks to a careful use of her devil fruit's power, let us sneak through unmolested. Frankly, it was boring. The only sound filling my ears was the quiet sequence of our steps over the white noise of Ain's lobby itself, and everything kind of looked the same. There was a dull, distant roar of an infinitely large waterfall coupled with the sea's waves crashing on the shore. The marching of countless marines rang among the buildings, which echoed in a cacophony that quickly began to grate on my nerves. If not for the imposing gates that were always easy to spot, I would have gotten lost several times already, and even that would have been more exciting. No, all we did was walking, and none stopped us. One gate after the other, we walked forward while Robin's silence grew tenser and tenser, to the point that I could almost taste it in the air. So skillful was she, that I barely recognized the color of some of the buildings we walked through, but we didn't cross with the hordes of wolves riding marines. We barely saw the back of the 2 giants guarding one of the gates, and I genuinely thought we'd meet the 3-faced judge. If only to sneak past him. Instead, nothing. I can see why you were Mr. Zero's partner, Miss All Sunday. Makita let out a low chuckle while we strolled across the last bridge, and into the miniature island that hosted the Tower of Justice, and arguably all that we were looking for. Robin simply glanced back, a deadly blank expression on her face, and I noticed that her hands were trembling. Following instinct more than anything else, I took one in mine, dragging on me her hollow, wide eyes. We'll walk through them, and rise beyond, I swear it. I squeezed her hand, and I tried to transmit just how much I believed in what we were doing. I no longer felt the annoying weight of the wedge my existence had somewhat forced into the crew of the future Pirate King, but wasn't it up to me to care for each of us, especially since Luffy was a bit too thick-headed for it? Robin, fear is a part of what keeps us alive, but don't let the past dictate your future. Her eyes, if possible, widened even more, and I knew without asking that she was thinking about the small, black pawn with her features that she refused to give me the history of back when we played chess. I saw when she realized that I knew, and I felt when she understood that I believed she was strong enough to bear her past with a straight back. Her eyes narrowed minutely as she fully worked through the implications of what she had just realized, only to squeeze my hand back with as much strength as she was capable of. We're friends, aren't we? Under the shadow cast by the Justice Tower, over the rumble of the chaotic waves beneath the island, the question felt thinner than paper, friendlier than glass, just like Robin was in that moment. Sanji and Makita, for their part, understood that something was going on and they held back. All for one, and one for all. I smiled at her, together. She took a hitched, deep breath that shook her shoulders, and a genuine smile blossomed on its own on her face while her back lost some of its tension. Together she repeated, and left my hand before striding forward purposefully. Faintly, just beneath the echo of our steps, hidden amongst the white noise that surrounded us, I thought I heard an odd, joyful speck of laughter, dirishishishi. One floor after the other, the 4 pirates kept rising, infiltrating the enemy's stronghold without a hitch, until, of course, everything came to a stop. Mikita, Sanji, Coby, and Robin, still dressed up as Marines, walked into a giant room that looked like some sort of Zen garden. There was real grass on the ground, an actual outcropping of trees, and the relaxing gurgle of sluggish miniature rivers that worked their way through the artificial landscape. Quickly, they transitioned into a jog as the archaeologist decided to change the pace, only to stand suddenly still when 3 dark-dressed figures appeared in a blur on the other side of the room. "I told you I smelled intruders," a dark-skinned man, with a Fu Manchu mustache, a pointed goatee, and long hair braided in a thick queue that somewhat resembled a scorpion's tail spoke first, an ugly grin stretching his scarred face. "The wolf always knows when sheep walk into his den." Chapapapa. A decidedly odd, ball-shaped person with an actual zip on his face nodded eagerly, "Of course. Because you are a wolf human, your devil fruit power." Zip. The zipline was actually pulled closed by a white-haired, face-painted man that was holding a kukhara, a staff traditionally carried by Buddhist monks, whose eyes hovered with interest over the newcomers. "Oh." Before he could begin to talk, Sanji darted forward at speeds unheard of before, and kicked the wolf Zoan so hard, that even if the latter raised his arms in an instinctive cross-block, he was bowled over and crashed into the nearest wall, tumbling into the following room. A flurry of kicks following up and forcing him to transition into his hybrid form to ward against the determined cook. Ordinarily, he didn't like to go in a fight with the purpose to kill. His kicks had been developed to defend the baratai, and his hands were meant to create wonders in a kitchen, but his opponent was a Zoan user, and if he died, there was a chance that the Going Merry could keep sailing with them as her own person, spirit, wolf, thingy. So Sanji didn't relent, and he kept pushing, feeling like he was kicking steel and being hit by a raging beast. The comparison came naturally, and almost stole him a smile. "It's just like fighting a less dumb moss head." While this happened, the pink-haired pirate dressed as a marine shrugged off his white shirt and beret, rolling his shoulders to free them before pointing at one enemy, and then to the other. "So Mikita, which do you prefer, freak number 1, or freak number 2? "You're the freakiest of them all," the blonde, blue-eyed chocolatier pirate replied while blurring forward, her legs pushing with enough strength to move a normal person concentrated into a mass that amounted to a single kilogram. Only to shift to her top of 10 tons when delivering a powerful knee thrust into the barely there raised staff of her chosen target. The metal staff, for all that it had been forged to work as a weapon handled by a superhuman man, folded like paper, and the CP9 agent behind it was flung back, not unlike his Fu Manchu companion. "Kya ha ha ha." Mikita laughed as she witnessed once more just how much she had been underusing her own abilities, without even beginning to touch the more complex, cerebral tricks that Coby had suggested. She had been able to match Mr. 2, merely after a few days of trying new stuff. It had been months since then, months during which she had never stopped casually arguing with the first mate about this and that, a length of time during which Coby had seemed genuinely overjoyed to be able to help her expand her abilities. She wasn't as emotive as the others, but on the sea, you couldn't help growing some affection for your vessel, and seeing yet another of the Straw Hat's first mate's plan unfold was always a treat. "It looks like we have the situation well in hand." Coby's voice rang with certainty as he started to jog to a very sedate pace towards the agent that was mumbling unintelligible things through the closed zipline. "You go ahead, I'm sure one of the others will come to my rescue if need arises. You know why we're here, and what we're looking for." His first punch blurred forward and missed his target, who seemed to fold in the air to avoid being hit, only for a sweeping kick to bat him aside and away from the door that Robin had been aiming for when leading her friends towards where what they wanted was. With her way free, it was a matter of minutes before she walked in. Yes, a what, and not a who, because the person in question had very little of human, either in appearance or, more importantly, in his soul. So it's true. Spondam was a pale man of slim stature with wavy, wild lavender hair in a layered style that was roughly shoulder length and parted in the middle. He had black markings around his large eyes, his narrow nose was of a dark red, and he was already waving a decidedly elephant-looking saber in Robin's direction. "You dare." But he couldn't finish talking as O'Hara's survivor fell forward and rolled, avoiding the suddenly elongating trunk blade only to cross her arms to help her focus while her powers answered to her command. The annoying voice of perhaps one of the most detestable beings on the planet was silenced immediately. Zorro himself hadn't been able to hold onto his weapon when she first walked on the Going Merry, and even then, he was 10 times the swordsman that particular caricature of a clown could ever be. Slender arms blossomed from the shoulder of the CP9's boss, and a quick, unforgiving twist snapped his neck cleanly. Robin watched his body fall with banal solemnity while the living weapon retreated into its resting state, clattering to the stone floor with the ring of steel. Arching an eyebrow at the appearance of yet another thing that proved Coby's predictions and confirmed the feasibility of his mad plan to save the Going Merry, she began to loot the place. Her experience aided her when her devil fruit's power wasn't enough to make her discern everything she needed immediately, and with distaste, she began by squirreling away the golden snail transponder that the man had at his wrist. That was one thing she'd keep from Coby, knowing that he'd gleefully blow it in an ice as they left, only to see the Marines annihilate themselves, only to see that which had caused her so much fear and tension vanish. Even as she considered the less charitable aspects of the first mate's charade, she felt herself smile, and this time, she didn't bother masking her reaction, not because nobody could see, but because she knew that whatever may come, her crew would be her for her. I had never actually found myself into a 1vs1 fight, and while I was surprised at the speed and the strength that I could feel in my blows, the zip-lipped agent I was facing kept folding around him as if he was a piece of paper, impossibly avoiding even those attacks that he couldn't have simply moved out of the way of. How the hell? I punched high and I followed with an instinctive elbow thrust when I spotted something moving to my left. Do you keep dodging? The coby allows users to make their body extraordinarily flexible in order to avoid any attacks, float, and bend their body like a piece of paper. Chapapapa. Fakura replied as he kept avoiding my blows, and I blinked when inspiration caught me. After all, if one needed help, on some occasions, the only thing to do was to ask. And how do you train it? It is the opposite of Tekai. Chapapapa. The bastard avoided a knee thrust only to stand still, receiving a punch in the middle of his solar plexus, that made me flinch back as he didn't move. This technique hardens the user's muscles to the level of iron, allowing them to withstand and effectively nullify any damage they might have taken from attacks. Chapapapa. While the coby involves relaxing the body completely, in order to flow around the opponent's attacks. Fakura of the CP9 assumed a martial arts stance a few meters in front of me, his expression blank while he kept talking my ears off. Okay, 2 techniques done, 4 to go. I ducked under a kick only to roll to my right in order to dodge a hit that came from behind, Fakura having moved at a speed that my eyes could barely follow. It's nice to see that getting used to do everything without glasses is paying off now. I rose my arms just in time to parry another kick that bowled me over, making me roll over the grass that covered the floor. Even if I felt my forearms scream in pain, I was grinning. I had vague memories of those techniques from the manga, and receiving a refresher when it was so readily provided could hardly hurt, could it? How can you be so fast? I affected a frightened tone, which my opponent caught, hook, line, and sinker. Saru allows the users to move at extremely high speeds in order to avoid attacks, as well as to attack at higher speeds and with greater power, Chapapapa. Fakura blurred through the distance that separated us and tried to poke my eyes out, only for me to narrowly dodge. Luckily, the talkative assassin kept explaining, the principle of this move is to kick off the ground at least 10 times in the blink of an eye. Don't bullshit me. I roared back while I rose a leg to catch a kick on my shin, proceeding to deliver a punch of my own on the nearest shoulder. This time, I pushed through the resistance I found, and it was the assassin to be sent back. I saw you bounce off the air, as if you could fly. Of course. Fakura was really a talkative fellow, wasn't he? I didn't even have to really try. Jeppo is merely an application of Saru, in which the strength in our legs is such that we can push off cushions of air to stay afloat. The same strength needed to kick the ground 10 times in a second is released in a single push while hardening the sole of your feet. That's 4 techniques done. I nodded to myself while I rose my guard, exchanging another deadly sequence of kicks and punches with a trained assassin that simply couldn't stop explaining what he was doing. Part of me was elated at the easy success of my impromptu interrogation, another felt kind of cheated out of the fight I had been spoiling for. This was meant to be challenging. While nowhere near Luffy or Zoro's level of innate idiocy, I too wanted to put my life on the line by fighting directly, instead of betting it on my own schemes. Fakura appeared once more in front of me, and I tightened every muscle I had, from my asshole to my clenched fists. I put all of my training into contracting all I could control consciously, and remained with my guard raised. The hit bowled me over, and I was flung through a small outcropping of trees. Fuck, then I realized something, and busted out laughing. I didn't feel the pain of the blow, simply, my feet lost traction at the wrong moment. Tekai is a go. I didn't care much for the Shigen or the Ryan-Keiku, given what I had just been told. I rather suspected that they were merely the clever combination of Tekai and Saru, one tightening your fingers to pierce the opponent, the other applying the iron body to the tip of your foot while slashing with all the power needed for a Saru. It kind of made sense, and while I would have loved to waste the entire day slugging it with Fakura as I slowly kept unveiling the secret techniques of their merry band of assassins, I had more important shit to do. I rose my guard, and I smiled madly. If I dealt with this fucker fast enough, I'd try to butt in Sanji and Jabber's fight. We're here to steal what's needed, not for a standoff. I kicked the ground repeatedly, cracking it slightly before all that power exploded as if somehow, kicking the same point was capable of turning the kinetic energy into potential, which discharged after a second, propelling me forward. Ahahaha. I couldn't help but laugh as I bowled myself over, unable to control it just yet, but elated because of the development. This was where my ascent to true personal might began. This was where I turned from an observer into a player. My heart sang with joy as I whipped about, raining a hail of blows onto the nearest black blur. My knuckles split, my hands were soon dyed red, but I could only keep punching, each staggering moment of pain before the hit went through enhancing the personal satisfaction I was feeling. My first right punch was avoided by Fakura folding around the blow, only to transition into a Shigen aiming for my heart. He was too close for me to avoid him, so I tightened everything once more, turning the resulting push into something I needed to backflip. With my muscles still contracted, I suddenly pushed my legs straight into the air, keeping my feet as steely as I could, and for a fraction of a second, I felt a faint resistance where there should have been none. Jeppo, getting there. My failed backflip made me fall face first into the ground, where I rolled to the side to avoid a deadly kick from Fakura, who had apparently decided to literally zip his lips closed to avoid instructing me further. Back to my feet, I kicked the ground, and put myself at a safe distance from the guy that was now mumbling through his forcefully closed lips. I couldn't help the grin on my face. I felt it widen until it hurt. I felt the various bruises on my body like marks of merit, as each of those blows had been meant to kill me, and he hadn't succeeded, because apparently my constant efforts were now paying off in full. Sure, he was the weakest of the CP9 bunch, but I had to start somewhere, didn't I? When he rocketed towards me in a Saru, I copied his movement, tilting my torso back at the last moment while I swung my foot hardened with Tekai. I felt a dull, ripping sensation as my limb tore through my opponent's head. Our relative speed enhancing my hit to something his iron body couldn't hope to oppose. Then the pain caught up with me, and I rolled to the ground holding my side, where a finger-sized puncture hole was seeping blood onto my white, marine-issued trousers. Even then, I couldn't stop laughing. I had made it. Yeah, I'll leave Jabber to Sanji though. And while I want to keep up with the fast pacing of this story, skipping everything would make the whole thing meaningless, so I opted for a chapter like this one. I won't repeat the fights that happened exactly like canon, having them on the background of the new elements. Of course, the infiltration team managed up to the tower where the other members of the CP9 resided. Robin has a lifetime of experience in this sort of operation, and Makita too, while Coby can be sneaky, and Sanji would do everything if a woman asked nicely. I used this chapter to solve Robin's psychological hold UPS in a way that mirrors canon, but it's not quite the same. Here she walks into acceptance of their friends, as described by Jaguar D. Sol, with her head held high, instead of falling into it while despairing. Also, we have the MC first actual, classical fight. He has the opponent spill his guts about every technique, because he kind of needs it to keep his breath. For all of his self-training and constant pushing, he's been doing so for only since East Blue. That's less than a year of work without having any extraordinary talent, gift, or devil fruit power. He still has the explosion devil fruit with him, of course, but it's kind of a last resource, and while he's being punched about, he wants to test himself. A devil fruit right now would count as cheating, not against the enemy, but against the effort he put in all this time to get stronger. Still, he's a clever bastard, and he squeezed his opponent for all he was worth before ending the fight. Now he knows the actual theory behind the 6 powers, and he has some time to figure out the more interesting things. I hope I managed to convey all of that in the chapter. With the next chapter, I'll close up all the fights and show the minor surprises that I prepared. 2 to 3 chapters from now, we'll be done with Thriller Bark, and since I've forgotten completely about it until now, I'll drop some bounties too in the next chapter, preparing a small twist that will inject some more originality in this canon soup. Still, as always, opinions. Let me know what you think. And check out Coby, Thunder King, the twin story of this FIC. Chapter 10. Birth of a King. Under the asleep guard of Zoro, Usopp, Frankie, and Chopper had not stopped working. The only way for every member of the crew to make it, was to be faster than the Marines' answer once they realized that Ain's lobby was under attack. Even Luffy didn't think that they could fight against a Vice Admiral, somehow. Only the mention of that particular rank on Coby's part had been enough to establish just the kind of hot mess they'd be in once they were done with the shopping trip into one of the most guarded places of the entire world. The entire plan hinged on 2 facts. 1. If there was any hope of finding a Zoan devil fruit with its description, it would be in Ain's lobby. 2. It was likely that the big base would have a power user or 2. There was a chance that one could have eaten a Zoan, and Coby had shown that the powers blossomed again into the closest compatible fruit, both with the fruit that had been of Mr. 5, and the one which had then been eaten by Usopp. All in all, the chances were remote. But they weren't zero, and that was all that mattered to the crew. Luffy was doing his part perfectly, fighting against the one that Coby had seen was the strongest, the one who was guaranteed to push the captain to his limits, and beyond them. Usopp sighed as he kept working. There were 1,001 things to complete, even with Frankie's insane skills and unique set of cyborg bullshittery that the sniper was already thinking of a way to replicate. Chopper helped as he could, moving what needed to be moved in his muscle point, calculating the impossible things that even with the knowledge required the user of the Munch Munch fruit could only guess at. They were still going to build an entire ship, with only 3 people. It was insane, it was impossible. Usopp grinned madly, his expression reminiscent of Coby's. It was exhilarating. He could almost feel himself constantly growing stronger in virtue of the cleverer and cleverer uses he made of his power. Never in his life he would have believed himself capable of this much. Hattori wasn't lying then. The new voice was an unwelcome addition to the white noise composed by the scraping of wood, the hammering of metal, and the constant rumble of the sea. Turning his head, the sharp eyes of the straw hat sniper immediately found the origin of the disturbance, coming out of a strange distortion in the very air shaped like a door that gave on a landscape of truly vibrant, weird colors, were three people. There was a slim, pretty woman with blue eyes and glasses. Her strawberry blonde hair was about shoulder length, and it fell free over her shoulders as she impassively stared at her targets, while on her left there was a man with a white baseball cap and a truly oddly shaped, squared and long nose. He had an orange, high-collared shirt with blue sleeves, jeans, and white sneakers. Closing the door with a soft thump, there was a tall man with big lips, a black beard, and black hair styled after the horns of a bull. His shoulders were large, and his expression matched perfectly the one of his companions. To find someone capable of keeping him busy, this is truly unprecedented. Their arrival, however, hadn't gone unnoticed by the sleeping Zoro, who already was tying his bandana in place, bloodlust rising from him as if steam. Sandai Kaititsu, the cursed blade which had been tested against the swordsman's own luck, was already cutting the air before Chopper could truly realize what was going on. The square, long-nosed stranger was the first to react. A cross guard was realized with two straight, short swords, only for him to be flung back as he hadn't been expecting the flying slash to push him so hard. A split second later, the same joyfully bloodthirsty weapon was plunged into the eye of the tall, dark-haired man, who fell to the ground, dead. The transition had been so smooth, so natural, so unexpected, that the one responsible for transporting the assassins had been felled while he was still reeling from the first attack. Then, as if to spite her, Zoro didn't even glance as he stepped by. Khalifa's own instincts, refined by years of missions, warred against the training that had been hammered into her. Attack, attack, attack. She was indecisive for a split second, and that fraction of time cost her the faint opportunity that the swordsman provided. It was because of the years spent undercover, which had dulled the reactivity her training should have left her with, because the green-haired man had struck as if he had been waiting for their arrival. Because of 1,000 other reasons, because the mere idea of attacking Zoro in that moment had summoned a single, daunting answer to the back, unconscious part of her mind, a certainty that in the ends meets everyone. Had she attacked, she would have died. Usopp on his part was hardly still while Zoro casually created that opening. A sweeping motion of his arms, and a table holding a large number of items were dumped into his awaiting, open, steel-like mouth. Springs were dumped alongside scraps of metal, and a second later, the dial-modified, three-wheeled motorcycle that had been once of Smoker joined them. The merging happened in a matter of microseconds. Usopp's power stretched in a familiar manner, and combust pipes appeared out of his calves, thick wheels sprouted not unlike spurs. In a moment, Usopp had fired off 3 blows with his slingshot, each pellet different and uniquely dangerous. The first impacted a few meters from the woman, who, at the sound of the casing breaking, returned fully in possess of her skills. A thick cloud of barely visible smoke erupted immediately, only the sparks caused by the shell against the ground igniting the smoke, which blew up in a fiery blaze. Khalifa rocketed not backward, where the fight was going on between Keiko and Zoro, but to the left, exactly where one of the other 2 pellets was striking. Once more, she couldn't stop to engage, and was forced to move, only for the pellet to reveal itself as a common lead bullet, which buried itself uncaringly into the ground. Her eyes darted about with speed unheard of, seeking for the attacker, only to spot the still at work Frankie and the muscled, furry form of a horned creature. Kami allowed her to fold around the meter-long, iron-cast harpoon which almost took away her liver, which was followed up by two other leaden bullets. Having had the time to recognize the bullet, Khalifa hardened her flesh with Tekai, batting aside the blow while her eyes finally zeroed in on the enemy sniper. Usopp was standing without trying to hide atop one of the wooden towers built in the small shipyard. The second bullet impacted without effect on her skin, only to release the same, transparent, alcohol-based mixture that had been ignited before. A third one went up in sparks immediately after, setting everything aflame. She moved with Saru, her left leg rising up sharply as she created a highly compressed slash of air with Ryan Keku that blasted the flames back in an angry arc towards the shipyard. Another explosion went off in front of it, releasing a pillar of sand that smothered the flames, and as Khalifa darted towards the position of the sniper, she noticed that he was no longer there. The buzzing of a shaped bullet rang by her ear, making her flinch to the side, and use Kami once more to avoid 3 separate harpoons that had been prepped while she dealt with the sudden fire. Her eyes darted around, analyzing all the places that could be most advantageous for what clearly was a clever, long-ranged fighter, only to stop, and arch an eyebrow at the sudden red herring that was placed in front of her. Twirling a slender, hollow, blue-tinted staff, was an orange-haired, slender girl. Smirking tauntingly, she spoke with false bravado, "You ever heard of not sticking your head into the lion's mouth?" The eyes of Khalifa landed on what clearly was going to be the figurehead of the ship that was being built. It was a realistic-looking, snarling lion's head. Realized into the unique, reddish tint of Adam's wood, it held cleverly hidden hinges that looked like they had been plated with gold. The inlaid noble metal ran from along the snout of the creature and into the much larger, mane-like structure of flat pieces that weren't unlike a propeller when taken to jitter. Still, Khalifa raised an unimpressed eyebrow at the woman in front of her, taunting, "Those capable of killing you won't make you any favors, on this sea, pirate, although, it won't be a problem for you any longer." Faster than ever, the assassin darted forward, the Shigan piercing into the woman, who dissolved into mist, only to be replaced by another, her voice casually thrown about as if by a clever ventriloquist. "Can't believe to what you see? You should know better than to attack a target that looks just too good to be true. Stalling tactics won't help you." Khalifa barely held herself back from snarling, and charged forward once more, stumbling through illusion after illusion, avoiding bullets only to be tripped by wires that sprang suddenly from the ground. She nimbly avoided the fiery explosions set up by the sniper, only to walk face full into a mixture of stinky traps, glue that slowed her down significantly, and impossibly sharp, thin blades. She tried to use Jeppo exactly once, while she was airborne, without any obstacle obscuring the impossibly mobile sniper. Usopp had a field day. It cost him no effort to rain hit of every kind on her then. For all that she was fast, and very mobile, the long-nosed, long-ranged attacker could create a wide field of effects without even needing to try. The long-nosed sniper's heart was thundering in his chest, and not only with the usual, known fear of failure. Fear of death, fear of pain, they were all there, like old friends. He knew them all, but no pain his opponent could inflict even remotely approached the hurt that the mere idea of having to abandon the going merry had caused. And while his heart seemed to be willing to run out of his chest in fright, the sniper's hands were absolutely still. The countless, minor, and irrational fears were shored up behind a wall of possible uses of his devil fruit's power, and they'd have to climb taller than the veritable mountain of tricks he had prepared to face every danger his mind was capable of summoning. The battle dragged itself away from the shipyard proper, where Frankie kept up his incredible work, as Nami and Usopp acted in tandem to corral and harass their enemy. Khalifa, for all that she could flatten them both in a fraction of a second if she managed to close the distance, simply couldn't break the illusions that the orange-haired witch set up while the assassin was harried by the sniper. And she couldn't approach that long-nosed bastard before he relocated, moving at speeds that should be prerogative of Chipper Pole agents. 1 minute turned into another, and eventually, the battle between the two cowards stretched to the point that the other two main clashes came to an end. Khalifa was turning towards yet another mirage when she saw the impossible. The Straw Hat Boy that had been keeping up with Lucci had actually walked back on his own two legs. He was bloodied, his wounds seeped constantly, and his breath was ragged to the point that it was a wheezing, broken sound. Held by one ankle, the broken form of the most dangerous member of the CP9 drew a wet spread of blood on the ground. His eyes burned fiercely despite his battered body, and as he drew near the beached, harmless-looking caravel, he dragged his straw hat back in place. He wheezed while the muscle-covered. The large shape of the fur-covered man that had been by the side of Frankie until that moment came running, a fast cat man. He breathed deeply a couple of times before shouting, "Mary." Khalifa took a step towards the clearly distracted, exhausted man, only for her instinct to force her to size up once more. The feeling of annoyance that had been mounting during the fight was erased once more by the cold, unforgiving presence of before. Of that ephemeral moment in which the world had stilled. And sure enough, there was the flat of a blade resting on her shoulder, accompanied by the heavy breathing of the green-haired man. "Don't." The command was given flatly, unforgivingly, and it stopped her breath for a moment. When she still tried to move, she felt a hit at the base of her skull, and everything went black. Zorro sheathed his drawn weapon once more, untying his bandana and walking towards the going Mary while Chopper began to flutter around the unbowing shape of Luffy. Nami reappeared out of mist, and Usopp came to a rumbling stop. The trail of smoke rising from his calves disappearing as he spat into a large bag several pieces, only for his jaw to open wide as he returned to a fully human shape and finally returned Smoker's three-wheeled motorcycle into a single piece. Everyone felt how important the moment was, and not only because of the potential consequences. One thing was killing in the heat of battle. This was going to be deliberate, decided and carried out because it might give a chance to live to one of their nakama. Nami was used to hard choices, she made them each day under Arlong's yoke, and even this rang terrifyingly close to unacceptable to be carried out. The only thing that kept her from protesting was the very real chance of losing their most reliable companion, the caravel from East Blue who had braved the Grand Line for their sake. Usopp swallowed harshly, but other than that, he didn't give any sign of hesitation. He loved the Mary more than anyone, and he'd see her safe and hail. If he had to burn the whole world for it, so be it. Zoro breathed quietly, his hand resting on the hilt of Wado Ikimonji, and his thoughts far away, to memories that he rarely allowed himself the luxury of relieving, of just another friend that he once had, who vanished from his life without him being able to do anything about it. It wouldn't happen again, he couldn't allow that any more than he could allow himself to be defeated. Chopper was a doctor, he wanted to find a cure to everything. The human reindeer would one day be the greatest medic in the world, and he had been shunned all of his life because he was a monster. A blue nose that denied him the comfort of his natural family, and the unique nature of not being born human, keeping a wall between him and those that he felt could be like him, but who called him monster. Usopp had been the first to show that monstrous was something that meant very little, with his unnaturally long nose and metal-like jaw. Just like Chopper, his appearance was weird because of his devil fruit's power. For the first time, he came to realize that the title monster meant something very different for him than what it actually meant, because there was no doubt that what Luffy was about to do counted as monstrous. The life of one of the crew was in danger, and the captain would deliberately take another life to guarantee not the Mary's sure salvation, but a chance, a single chance to make it. The emotions of the crew, now that the moment was here, might have been different, their reasonings, diverse. But surprisingly for some, they all found themselves thinking the same, exact thing, that they would kill hundreds if it meant that they could save the Mary. That they would poison food to keep the crew safe. That they would lie and manipulate to assure that the chances for their nakamas were as good as possible. For a single moment, they all felt like Coby had since his very first day sailing with Luffy. To Luffy, the world was simple, he was going to become king of pirates, he was going to make up a crew as he went, and they were going to have a lot of adventures and meet together. He was the captain, so he was meant to be strong, and his crew was meant to be cool and do the stuff he couldn't, so, like navigating, or cooking, or carrying him on the sea, like the Mary had done. Now, she couldn't carry him to the One Piece anymore, but Coby, who could think and plan and prepare like Luffy couldn't, had found a way to let her sail with her instead. One possibility for that to happen, was to kill this guy that he didn't like at all, as he lied to those he called friend as a means of living. Luffy just had the fight of his life, he was tired, heavily wounded, and just 3 steps away from death's door. He almost died several times before, and each time, he had been ready to do so with a smile, as he'd die on the path to the One Piece. So, with the unique brand of foolhardy determination of the truly faithful, or the truly stupid, Luffy smiled widely, completely uncaring of the life at his feet, and stomped on the head of his downed opponent, making it explode against the unforgiving ground. He didn't notice the wet crunch of bone, or the splatter against his calves. He barely realized that Chopper was treating him while he was still standing. The only thing he could focus on, was the beached form of the Going Mary, and the possibility that she could be saved from a moment to the next. Cutting away the need for the new ship that Frankie was building in the close-by shipyard to have to sail to Ain's lobby, back to Water 7, and forward again. That was the only thing that mattered. It's here. A childish, female voice rang from the beached Going Mary, and the members of the crew could make out the small shape of a raincoat-covered girl dancing up and down the deck, holding the by now known shape of a reincarnating devil fruit high over her head. This is it. Good. Luffy barely managed to see the little girl bite into the devil fruit before his body gave out, and he fell into the awaiting arms of their human reindeer doctor, who kept working without missing a beat. And I'm having an inordinate amount of fun with this FIC, I don't know why. Anyway, given recent developments, I confirm that I'll write this FIC up to Marineford's timeline. In particular, I'm enjoying the parallels that I'm drawing with the other. And there is something inordinately easy in not having to waste time to describe who is who beyond bits of description here and there. I barely spent 40 words describing Jabra, another 80 for Sanji's mindset, and everyone knew what was going on without any fuss at all. I mean, the fact that I've written all of this stuff in less than a week speaks for itself. Is this what fanfiction is meant to be? I get now why everyone does it. It would have been nice to know it before I began more than 30 other fics, but whatever. This chapter is mostly focused on the changed character underlining the whole crew. I hope I managed to give the moment the weight and gravitas it deserved. Originally, this chapter was meant to be all for the fights, but there is just so much I can do to make interesting Usopp's harrying or Nami's illusions, while I didn't feel the need to replicate the already seen and sung dance of Zoro and Luffy. Anyway, as always, opinions and hopes? Let me know what you think. Chapter 11. Unexpected results. The wail of the sirens rang loudly in the air, signaling that somehow, the alarm had been given about our presence. I watched dispassionately as Sanji finished off his fight while I tied a rough lump of bandages to stave off the bleeding from my side. The conflict between the wolf Zoan and our cook was so interesting that I even pushed up my glasses on the bridge of my nose, observing with greed at all the stuff that Sanji could perform. Apparently, the idea of losing the Mary had been enough to ignite his soul, because he rained flaming kicks on his opponent, which eventually keeled over. Insensate. Without stopping, Sanji rained down one last kick, breaking the neck of the sturdy Zoan type with unyielding determination before he turned towards me. His mouth opened to speak, only for his eyes to dar beyond me and turn into hearts. Makita-chan, Rob. I immediately tuned him out, letting out a tired sigh as the 2 women that had come with us regrouped with me. A cursory glance informed me that while Makita had a few difficulties, they had been nothing that her recently improved use of her powers couldn't overcome, while Robin's eyes held a newly discovered warmth as she lifted up a jute sack. Still, the smile that should have accompanied it wasn't there. There are 2 devil fruits, but they're not on the encyclopedia enriched with notes that I found in that office. The other's shoulders slumped a bit, the disappointment weighing on them suddenly while I walked forward to take a peek myself, and I smiled. That's a giraffe zoan. It is. Our chocolatier's question was immediately followed by Sanji's, who had just managed to lit a new cigarette. How do you know? I read another version of that encyclopedia, years ago. I bullshitted my way easily in order to spare me the headache of the we're all in a manga revelation, only to leaf through the treasure trove that Robin had so easily delivered. Is this how to make turn objects into their Zoan counterparts? The devil child smiled as she tilted her head. Why yes it is. Then her eyes darted around, and her expression became more serious, but we don't have the time for it now, we'd better go. Let's pass by their kitchens. I decided, just in case the wolf fruit decided to pop up there, that one is clearly marked in this encyclopedia. And it was, apparently, with his access to reserved information. Spondum had done his homework. Both Lucci and Jabra fruits were marked out among the pages, as were several others, all belonging to the Shichibukai, Moria, Crocodile, Kuma. They were all there, in pages that had been clearly added later, one next to the other. As if to keep together the info needed to strike at the government's dogs. Of course, it was then that my eyes fell on the remarkable sword she had strapped on her back. And what is this? I believe it's called Funkfried. She briefly showed the elephant saber, only to raise an eyebrow and gesturing towards it. Why, thinking of picking up swordsmanship? Zoro would never leave me alone then. I grinned. I made to comment further when the sirens blared again, as if with renewed intensity. We'd better go. Anyone knows for the kitchens? They're down that way. Mikita jabbed with her left thumb towards the hole in the wall she had made while clashing with her opponent, and I reluctantly returned the book to Robin, who flashed me an understanding smile before putting it away. We began to run towards the hole in the wall and quickly descended, Mikita leading the charge by simply hopping down, followed by Sanji, who jumped downward against the walls, and Robin that had a series of interlocked arms sprout from one wall to lower her to the ground floor. Without hesitating, I jumped down. I pushed aside the exhilarating sensation of free falling, only to kick downwards with my left. Making use of all the knowledge that Fakura had so easily granted me, my foot hardened to the point that my bones protested against the pull of the muscles and my tendon opposed the direction in which those were meant to contract, while all the other muscles in my leg distended explosively, discharging all the compressed energy into a single kick. The air, this time, offered much more resistance, maybe because I had been free falling already, maybe because I was more focused and not in the middle of a battle, but it had the effect of my kick making me bounce off the air much sooner. And much more strongly than what I had calculated for. With a soft pop, my failed Jeppo sent me careening off into the nearest wall, which cracked as I instinctively contracted every muscle I had to the point of rupturing it. Good news, I'm getting better at it. I touched out a piece of dusty debris that had somehow landed in my mouth. Bad news. I'm stuck. Dirishishishi. Robin didn't bother holding back her laughter as she used her power to pop me free from my self-inflicted prison, lowering me to the ground where the others were expecting me while rolling their eyes in exasperation. It was then that the transponder snail that Robin had been carrying, on account of being the most reliable of the group, began to ring, puru puru puru. With the classic colic, the devil fruit user lifted the microphone to answer, and the news delivered brought wide smiles to our faces. Well, we no longer strictly need to be covered, I concluded, still disbelieving of the news. Only to turn towards the others, we only need to reach the shore when they arrive on the new ship. Incapacitating this island's ability to fend off a raid from the inside sounds like the way to go to throw an appropriate party for the going merry and our new vessel. Surprisingly, Robin was the first to reply, and her smile was positively devilish as she spoke. I had the time to do a very thorough sweep of that office, and I think there's a pair of giants who'd be interested in the story you told me about your party on Little Garden. The large office almost visibly shook with the rage of his owner, the faintest golden sheen blazing into his eyes as he finished reading once more the reports. Reports that simply couldn't be true, which brought him to summon the other 3 persons present. Under a beam of sunlight that entered through the large windows that characterized that section of Marineford's headquarters of the Marines, front and center of the other 2, stood the Captain T-Bone. His gaunt face partially covered by pristine white bandages that stood out starkly against the dark of the heavy bags under his eyes. His posture was straight, and he didn't waver despite being clearly intimidated by the Fleet Admiral's tone of voice. "Whatever Garp might have organized, Captain, I assure you I do not appreciate practical jokes." The tone was positively frosty, and Sengoku already was thinking of one way or 3 to get back at the absurdly childish hero of the Marines. Who was the only possible candidate behind that absurdity? "Sir." The captain, however, apparently didn't quite understand how annoyed the Fleet Admiral was, and maintained his position. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "You don't understand." The reply was given in a flat tone as the Buddha brought his hands together over the scattered files on his desk. "No, sir." "You mean to tell me that you don't understand how co-opting 2 members of the CP9 in a scheme to cover for the incompetence that brought to the deaths of several Chipperpole agents, the defection of 2 of the most effective guard gates the Marines had in service, and the destruction of good part of Ain's lobby, will have you court-martialed?" Each accusation rang heavier than the previous, and by the time he reached the end of the phrase, Sengoku's hands were clenched in rage. "I fail to see how you couldn't understand this much." "Sir," the strawberry blonde woman adjusted her glasses as she spoke, "my colleague and I submitted complimentary reports of our own free will." The eyes of the Buddha shone a bit more intently when they shifted on Khalifa, only to drag themselves towards the white-haired form of a heavily bruised Kumadori. The fact that he hadn't used life return yet to restore his body to an uninjured state spoke heavily towards his theory of some prank. After all, the alternative was just so much worse. "Are you insinuating that what I've read is indeed correct?" The Fleet Admiral allowed himself to fully consider what had been told. A bunch of rookies, under the command of Straw Hat Luffy, a pirate that by all accounts survived a fight with Crocodile due to pure luck, and that ended up defeating him thanks to a dastardly sneak attack from a pink-haired child that looks like he should be still hiding behind his mother's gowns, have not only burned an undercover operation that took years to organize and implement, they also proved themselves capable of besting, one-on-one, the entire Chipperpole 9? Before Khalifa could answer, the Fleet Admiral landed both his hands flat on the table, smacking it lightly, with just enough strength to make the sound echo in the room over the, in comparison, feeble voice of the woman, to top it off. "This ragtag group of children turned 2 giants who have been serving faithfully for years, against the Marines, raided the Tower of Justice for anything of value, or esoteric in nature, tearing apart the first island in the process. Is that correct?" "Not completely, sir." T-Bone gulped nervously as Sengoku ordered him to talk, and he found that the words, despite him having written a concise report already, spun out on their own, his mind reliving those moments with disbelief coloring what wasn't buried under the exhaustion he had felt. The sirens blared signaling the presence of intruders in the Tower of Justice, and Captain T-Bone, who was detached to an ice lobby only to provide support, if needed, to the Chipperpole agents conducting their missions in the island easily reachable with the puffing Tom. All considered, it was a cushy position. Of everything one could think about those spooks, they tended to be competent. So he organized the troops to contain those foolhardy enough to dare sneak into one of the 3 great fortresses of the Marines that dominated the last section of the first half of the Grand Line. Questioning would be long and unmerciful, as to uncover just how they had managed to pass through all the defenses put in place without alerting anyone, but that would come later. On the first of the 3 islands that composed the complex called Ain's Lobby, wolf raiding, sabers-wielding Marines had been placed in positions perfect for ambushes in case the small group of opponents revealed by one of the security snail transponders. Snipers were placed both on top of the tallest buildings, and at the end of long stretches of wide roads that provided little to no cover, their flanks protected by designated battalions. To remove a possible avenue of escape in case even one of the intruders managed to run beyond the Marines, or had a devil fruit capable of letting him bypass them in some way, the Puffing Tom had been sent once more on its tracks, and the tall, iron gate leading to its tracks was slammed shut. The intruders would likely never make it out of the Tower of Justice. There was where the Chipperpole agents had their barracks after all, but protocol existed for a reason, and Captain T-Bone was no slacker. When communications with the other deployed forces were cut off, the Marine captain had hardly been worried. Worst case scenario, there would be a battle against a small count of exhausted individuals, and he was ready for it. He was not worried, nor he was nervous. With the patience that befitted his previous position as a knight, he awaited, virtue in his heart and determination sharpening his blade. When the massive gate leading to the bridge over the first immense gap exploded, however, Captain T-Bone was surprised, and when the dust cleared, he was terrified, if only for a moment. Oimo and Kashi, the two giants that had served the Marines since before T-Bone's grandfather was a spark in his own father's eye, were enraged. No, they were positively furious. With club and axe in their massive arms, they wore a furious expression on their faces, their teeth bared as fire burned in their eyes. Cowards! The shout of the first rattled the bones of the Marine captain, and turning his head as if on a swivel, he saw the forms of many trembling fellow Marines. Do not fold. His voice rang feebly in comparison to the giants, but it still held authority, and it was passed among the transponder snails set in every center of command. We are Marines. The white of your uniforms is as pristine as. His encouraging, rousing speech was quickly submerged under the voice of the other giant, equally as furious as the first, who slapped a building down to its foundations as if only to make a point. Liars. The other swept his axe, keeping the flat side perpendicular to the ground, and the building in front of him exploded in a rain of deadly debris, if not their voices. That was the element that broke the lines. Nothing in the life of those soldiers had quite prepared them for a charge led by two angry giants. On the ground level, it was mayhem at its finest. Somehow, the snipers were being silenced along with their guards, and T-Bone swore he saw eyes open randomly on buildings, only to disappear in a flutter of vanishing petals. The debris fell randomly, squashing those who hadn't been able to dodge, and with a snarl, T-Bone charged at the group of intruders, his sword held high. There was a blond man in elegant clothes, casually puffing on a cigarette as he kicked away both falling debris and soldiers faster than it could be easily followed with sight. At his side strolled a dark-haired statuary woman with cold, dark eyes and a faint, mocking smile while she carried a bulging jute sack with her. More eye-catching, however, were the other two. The first appeared like a yellow blur, and T-Bone was able to fully put her shape to focus only when she transitioned from one direction to another, while the other seemed to be basking in the attention, laughing rapturously. The slim, almost thin woman delivered kicks that shattered stone, dodged bullets with unconscious grace, and rocketed through open road and Marines alike, sending them flying with uncaring, delighted bouts of sadistic laughter. The one leading the charge, if possible, was the most eye-catching because he looked the least dangerous. With an atrocious pink shade of hair, he wore slightly askew glasses that he didn't seem to need as he made open use of 4 of the 6 powers, laughing madly as he messed up one technique, only to perform it again and getting visibly better at it. Bare-chested, he sported a lithe, if cored musculature, while one leg of his Marine-issued trousers was drenched red with his lifeblood, thanks to a wound hidden under makeshift bandages that didn't seem to be slowing him down at all. The captain charged forward, an enraged scream leaving his lips as he lifted his blade, a scream that carried all of his outrages for being unable to stop such defilement of Ein's lobby, for witnessing such casual brutality against the honorable soldiers that dedicated themselves to justice. A scream that was caught short, and that died with a whimper as a blade the size of an elephant smacked him aside as if he was a gnat. T-Bone was thrown off his feet by an attack that he hadn't even seen coming, and he felt his bones crack under the blow that sent him like a ragdoll to one side of the plaza that led towards the Puffing Tom's platform. Unable to move, and suddenly unable to draw full breaths because of the agonizing pain caused by his broken ribs and legs, the only thing the Marine captain could do was watch as the intruders walked forward, unmatched, only for one flag of the world government to fall, along with its post. Not far from their path, the pink-haired, laughing menace immediately grabbed it, and made a show of placing it safely just next to a small mound of rubble. T-Bone was unable to see his face, but for a moment, his entire figure seemed tense, only for his laughter to explode even greater as he pointed at the horizon, causing cheer and laughter to spring even among his companions. Not content with the mayhem caused to that point, the bespectacled criminal that couldn't have been older than 15 years old jumped on the rubble and pissed on the white flag of the world government. "I rather hoped you were embellishing, Captain." Sengoku's voice broke the flux of memories that T-Bone was lost in, only for the swordsman to shake his head. "I wasn't, sir." "Very well, conclude this." Report the fleet admiral felt the incoming headache declare himself as if playing a war drum, and he forced himself to not snap at the sequence of events that all the presents, and recordings, confirmed had happened. While the pink-haired kid was busy, one of the two warships that is ready to be deployed at a moment's time in the waters under Ein's lobby's purview managed to make land. "Make land?" Sengoku interrupted him, lifting a single paper. "Here I read that the ship in question crashed against, and went through, the Puffing Tom's platform. Did you not say you weren't one to embellish?" "Frankly, sir," the captain took a deep breath despite the pain it caused, "in that situation, I would have welcomed a lifeboat with a seaman falling from the sky. The warship touched land, it meant that reinforcements were there. And yet, the ship in question sported a circular hole that went clean through the hull, sir, and most of the soldiers on board were already incapacitated." Yes, the child that threw around squads of trained men like they weighed nothing." Sengoku was quickly approaching the end of his thin patience. "Let's shelve that. There are odder things than a child with devil fruits powers in the Grand Line. Although I'm demoting all those that were on that warship, and an inquiry will start, seeking to find out just how a ragtag bunch of children managed this mess." Once his secretary was done jotting down what he commanded that would be done, he gestured towards the captain T-Bone, who dully continued his tale. "The pirate's ship was an odd cross between a frigate and a galleon, sir. It flew Straw Hat's Jolly Roger. I lost consciousness when the broken warship began to be repaired by a steel-jawed man and a blue-haired one. I understand that the two giants sailed away on that one?" Sengoku breathed deeply as the report was concluded, and with a gesture of his hand, he sent away the presents without answering that question, only for something to jump to his mind. "Is there something else that you felt would be unproductive putting in your reports?" His voice injected molten steel into the spines of the two spooks and the captain, only for them to all turn with a blank expression while the woman took half a step forward. "Sir, when visiting Water 7, Monkey D. Luffy repeatedly introduced himself as the man who will be king of pirates, sir." "Of course he did." Sengoku pinched the bridge of his nose while waving his hand once more. "Dismissed." Once they were gone, the fleet admiral ordered his thoughts and dictated to the secretary, who had managed to keep a perfectly professional behavior. "The captain and the two Japerpol agents will be keeping their ranks, for the time being. You may go." When the subordinate left, Sengoku sighed again, took his glasses off once more, and folded them, neatly placing them over the stack of files he had organized while T-Bone completed his recount of the events. It was good to know that he hadn't been the end of some sort of practical joke. On the other hand, all of this mess came down to one person. One person, that Sengoku already knew was somewhere eating rice crackers instead of working, one person whose family was promising to be the source of many migraines for another generation still. Garp. The will of the Conqueror's king briefly slipped the control of the fleet admiral, and it was good that the captain and the two Chipperpole agents had vacated his office just like his secretary, because they would have immediately lost their senses if exposed to that brief flash of golden rage. Less than a minute later, as if nothing could go wrong in the world, the vice admiral in question walked into Sengoku's office with a big smile on his face. "You called? These will be the bounty posters for the next edition of the news coup." The fleet admiral refused to let himself fall prey to his justified emotions. Almost channeling his own inner Buddha, he accepted the events and moved to address them. "But before you do, I'd like your help with one of these. He needs a moniker that will stick into the minds of the bounty hunters, and maybe we'll be lucky, and be rid of him sooner, rather than later." The burly, carefree man lifted a bounty poster, flipping it to read the charges behind it, only to burst out laughing. "Oh, the balls on this one. Bwahahaha. It's a serious matter, Garp." Sengoku's calm, while still present, was beginning to crack. "I never got why this thing for titles was ever encouraged." Uncaring of his own precarious situation, the vice admiral ate a rice cracker that came out of nowhere. "And where the bounties exposed only to Marines, we wouldn't bother with such a ridiculous thing as battle names." Sengoku replied flatly, "But the bounty posters are meant to circulate among those willing to hunt those criminals for money. They must remain seared into the mind of civilians, so that they might spot our targets and inform the lawful authorities. In the same way, the monikers for the more distinguished Marines are meant to infuse a sense of safety into the population, and fear into the pirates' hearts." "But," Garp shrugged, incredibly bored by the situation, "pissing Coby? Since it's what it did. Battle names either refer to a uniquely distinctive trait, or call to a specific historic event." Sengoku immediately denied that option. "We want him hunted, not revered by every enemy of the world government, and the only thing of note he has truly done was to raid an ice lobby. We can't reinforce that point." Forcing himself to pay attention, since he already had occasion to celebrate his grandson's infamy despite the number of regulations and conduct codes it violated, Garp tossed up another name, "Pink Hair Coby." Sengoku snorted dismissively, blocking that obvious option too. "There are a lot of pink-haired people around, but after Shanks, it is not prudent to give a name quite like that." Denied. "Just make up some bogus event, then." Garp was apparently done with the conversation, his eyes almost greedily falling onto his grandson's poster while he let out another peal of laughter. "Bwahaha. Even if Luffy won't like having a bounty lower than that Coby's." "Bwahaha. Of course," Sengoku shook his head. "Captain, or not, even your grandson wouldn't push himself that far." Garp, perhaps for the first time in a decade, had a spark of wisdom elbow its way through the instincts that shaped the hero's personality, and he refrained from pointing out the obvious. Luffy simply didn't have either the grievances be motivated towards such an act, or the brain to understand its meaning. A bogus charge, this will put a target on his head, even if there will be those that fear going against one of hers. Why not? Let's make it clear that he's an estranged son. He'll have everyone and their mother on his tail. There's even the possibility that some of hers might take offense and hunt him down. The fleet admiral's mind was used to playing political games and conning pirates into doing as his larger strategy demanded. If it becomes a problem, we'll call it an exercise to stress test the answer of some department, and take away that name. You're a bastard, Sengoku. Garp looked at what had just been written down, laughter once more bubbling up in his belly. Estranged son, Charlotte Coby, et. The boy will have New World bounty hunters with a grudge after his head. Although it's a bit obvious, call him an estranged menace instead, it'll draw more attention. Bwahaha. That's still hilarious. Bwahaha. While the Vice Admiral was laughing, a humongous shape knocked at the office's door, and at the Fleet Admiral's behest, it made his way in. Kuma was a behemoth of a man, with incredibly large shoulders, a non-negligible power, and the only thing that the other Shishibukai lacked, true loyalty to the world government, and for extension, to the Marines. Kuma. Sengoku greeted him curtly, handing over one of the few copies of the new bounty posters that had been discarded because the pictures depicting the targets hadn't been deemed striking enough. While they weren't going to be the official ones, they were still enough to allow someone of the Shishabukai's experience to hunt. The Straw Hats are en route for the Florian Triangle. You were tasked with offering aid to your colleague, Moria. Correct. The eater of the pawpaw fruit took in the bounty posters, quickly scanning them. Dead or alive, Straw Hat, Monkey D. Luffy, 295 million belly. His attention was briefly caught by the name on the bounty poster, and he immediately began to think of a way to find a loophole in the order that was undoubtedly about to be given, as he wasn't willing to harm Dragon's son. Only alive, Black Kick, Vinsmoke Sanji, 195 million belly. Dead or alive, Devil Woman, Nico Robin, 200 million belly. Dead or alive, Men Crusher, Makita, 175 million belly. Dead or alive, Estranged Menace, Charlotte Coby, 330 million belly. Pushing hard against the programming that was slowly stealing his own mind from him, Kuma asked, Charlotte. Sengoku waved the question away, merely a ruse in case he slips the net. After the Florian Triangle there's Sabaonde, and if they manage to get into the New World, he'll be crushed swiftly. If the opportunity presents itself, however, you must capture him. We can't allow someone to defile a flag of the world government and get away with it. Kuma processed the entire set of orders he received, nodded, and exited the office. Now that I think about it, however, I'm curious. Sengoku abandoned the irritation born of the work that the Vice Admiral's grandson kept creating and snatched Luffy's new bounty from the other man. You have a reasonable name, Garp. What popped into your mind when you chose Dragon for your son's name? Ha! I wanted to give him a strong name, so that he could become a strong marine. Garp nodded seriously, crossing his arms with an air of pride about him. I almost named him Polar Bear, or Super Lion. Enthusiasm shone in the voice of the hero of the Marines as he spoke, only for him to scratch his chin, narrowing his eyes in thought. If I remember it right, it was a toss-up with Eagle Storm Tiger, but it was just too long and impractical, so I went for Dragon. Sengoku tiredly put down his glasses and proceeded to massage his temples, and so we know why he'd be anything but a marine. But, Sengoku, don't worry too much about it, soon his rebellious phase will end and he'll look for a proper job. Garp genuinely thought that his words were as reassuring as he meant them, so it took a second or two to understand why he was flying out of the office, the echo of a crashed window feebly reaching his ears. And added a few of the changed bounties. I'll remind everyone that Robin, Makita, Sanji, and Coby stormed an ice lobby basically on their own. Their bounties couldn't be any lower. Don't worry y'all, I don't do prophecy-based bullshit. Coby isn't a Charlotte, that's only Sengoku screwing him up because he needed something to drag hunters of every kind on our MC's ass. He's plain old Coby, even if you've seen him become a player instead than an observer. I hope I managed to close this upside-down arc in a satisfactory manner. These were a handful of chapters, true, but a lot of stuff happened since first made back on Skypiea, and I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on the development of everyone, and of the crew as a whole. The second part of the chapter is a bit odd, I admitted, but I wanted to wrap in a single block both the Marines' reactions, exemplified in the persons of Sengoku and T-Bone, the mayhem Coby organized as a celebration of his saving, indirectly as it is, of the Mary. And setting up the bounties that I've been neglecting until now. I wanted Ain's lobby to have an impact on the story just as it did in canon, and I thought that having T-Bone's recounting of the events would serve this chapter well. Also, I've always enjoyed Garp snippets in the manga, as we get to see how a guy as moronic as Luffy would be if he was super powerful and in a clear hierarchy of command. Since I was there, I gave a reasonable explanation for the moniker aspect of bounty posters. I just had fun writing Sengoku and Garp together. We'll also see the reactions of the crew next chapter, as we're due a bonding moment with Frankie and Mary on the new, for now, still unnamed, ship. Opinions of names I could use instead of Thousand Sunny. I get the foreshadowing of the sun on Oda's part, but as I've mentioned repeatedly, I just plain dislike the prophetic tilt the story has taken since the time skip. I'll try to work through Thriller Bark in 2 chapters max, we'll see what happens. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you liked it, subscribe to my channel for more fanfictions like this, and goodbye.